On Christmas Eve, a 5-year-old girl walked alone across town to a millionaire's mansion. When he saw what she was hiding under her dress, his world crumbled. The cold bit through Sarah Johnson's thin pink dress as she walked down the snow-covered sidewalk. Her small fingers clutched the fabric around her stomach, protecting the precious items hidden underneath. At 5 years old, she knew this wasn't how most kids spent their Christmas Eve, but she had no choice. Just a few more blocks, she whispered to herself, her breath visible in the freezing air. The streetlights had just come on, casting long shadows across the pristine snow. A car drove past, splashing slush onto her worn shoes. Sarah jumped back, protecting her dress. She couldn't let the hidden photograph get wet. It was her only proof, her only chance. The sound of laughter drifted from a nearby house. Through the window, she could see a family decorating their Christmas tree. A little girl about her age was being lifted by her father to place the star on top. Sarah quickly looked away. Grandma needs help, she reminded herself, thinking about that morning when she'd found her grandmother coughing in bed again. "Sarah, baby, I'm fine," her grandmother had insisted, but the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen table told a different story. The heat had been shut off yesterday, and the apartment was getting colder by the hour. Sarah remembered the moment she'd found the photograph, tucked away in her grandmother's old jewelry box while looking for extra change. The image showed a younger version of her grandmother standing next to a beautiful young woman who looked just like Sarah. Behind them stood a tall man with kind eyes, the same man whose mansion she was walking toward now. "What are you doing in my things?" her grandmother had asked when she caught Sarah with the photograph. "Who is she, Grandma? She looks like me?" Her grandmother's face had gone pale. "Put that away, child. Some things are better left in the past." But Sarah had also found the letter, and even though some words were too big for her to understand, she'd figured out enough. The woman in the photo was her mother, and the man was her grandfather, Mr. James Waters, the millionaire who lived in the big house on Hill Street. A gust of wind whipped around her, and Sarah hugged herself tighter. She'd taken her warmest dress, but it wasn't meant for December weather. Her feet ached from walking, but she couldn't stop. Grandma needed medicine, and they needed heat. Mr. Waters had money. Everyone knew that. He owned half the buildings downtown. "Watch where you're going, kid," a man called out as Sarah nearly bumped into him. She mumbled an apology and kept walking. The houses were getting bigger now, with longer driveways and taller gates. Christmas decorations grew more elaborate with each block. Reindeer made of lights, inflatable Santas, and trees that sparkled like diamonds. Sarah's legs trembled from the cold and exhaustion. She'd never walked this far alone before. Usually, the school bus dropped her off just 2 blocks from home. But she'd memorized this route from the times Grandma used to work at the Waters mansion, back before she got too sick to clean houses anymore. "Look, Mommy, that girl's all alone," a small voice called out from across the street. "Mind your business, sweetie," came the mother's reply. "Come inside now." Sarah quickened her pace. She knew what she was doing looked strange. A little girl walking alone on Christmas Eve, wearing only a dress in the snow. But she had no choice. Grandma would never have let her come if she'd asked. The Waters mansion appeared ahead, its iron gates looming against the darkening sky. Sarah's heart pounded as she approached. Through the bars, she could see the long driveway leading to the biggest house she'd ever seen. Warm light spilled from dozens of windows, but no Christmas decorations brightened its stern facade. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the intercom button beside the gate. Before she could press it, the gate creaked open on its own. A car was leaving, and Sarah slipped through before it closed again. The driveway seemed to stretch forever. Her wet shoes left small footprints in the fresh snow. Each step brought her closer to the massive front door, its brass knocker gleaming in the porch light. Sarah stopped at the bottom of the stone steps, looking up at the door. Doubt crept in, making her stomach tight. What if he didn't believe her? What if he called the police? What if this was a huge mistake? The photograph pressed against her belly, hidden beneath her dress. The letter crinkled softly with each breath. They were real. The truth was real. "Be brave," she whispered, her mother's words from the letter echoing in her mind. Sometimes love requires courage. Sarah climbed the steps one at a time, her hand sliding along the cold stone railing. At the top, she took a deep breath and reached for the doorbell. The sound echoed inside the massive house. Footsteps approached from within. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as the porch light flickered on. The door opened, and there he stood, the man from the photograph, older now but with the same kind eyes. Mr. James Waters looked down at the small girl on his doorstep, confusion crossing his features. "Can I help you?" Sarah's fingers clutched her dress tighter. "Mr. Waters," she said, her voice smaller than she'd intended. "I'm Sarah Johnson, and I think—" She swallowed hard. "I think you're my grandfather." His eyes widened as they dropped to her dress, where her arms wrapped protectively around what looked like a swollen belly. The color drained from his face. And then James Waters, one of the richest men in town, crumpled to the ground in a dead faint. Sarah stared at his unconscious form, the enormity of what she'd done crashing over her. In the distance, church bells began to ring, announcing the start of Christmas Eve service. She stood there, a 5-year-old girl with a hidden photograph and a desperate plan, wondering what would happen next. The warm air from inside the mansion spilled out around her, carrying the faint scent of coffee and leather. Somewhere in the house, a phone started to ring. "Mr. Waters," she whispered, kneeling beside him. "Please wake up. I have something important to show you." The photograph pressed against her skin, a secret waiting to change everything. All she could do now was wait and hope that the truth would be enough. "Sir? Mr. Waters?" Sarah's small voice echoed in the grand entranceway. Her hands hovered uncertainly over his still form, not sure if she should touch him. Heavy footsteps pounded against marble floors. "Mr. Waters!" A deep voice called out. Frank, the security guard, rushed from his station, his shoes squeaking on the polished floor. He stopped short at the sight of his employer sprawled in the doorway and a tiny girl in a pink dress kneeling beside him. "What happened here?" Frank demanded, already reaching for his radio. "Step back from him, young lady." "He just fell," Sarah explained, backing away. The photograph crinkled beneath her dress. "I told him who I was, and he fell." Frank knelt beside Mr. Waters, checking his pulse. "Mr. Waters? Can you hear me, sir?" He shot Sarah a suspicious look. "Who exactly are you?" Before Sarah could answer, Mr. Waters groaned. His eyes fluttered open, focusing first on Frank, then shifting to Sarah. He sat up slowly, one hand pressed to his forehead. "Sir, should I call an ambulance?" Frank asked, supporting Mr. Waters back. "No, no." Mr. Waters waved him off, his voice rough. "I'm fine. Just a bit of a shock." He kept staring at Sarah, particularly at her dress. "Young lady, did you say something about being your granddaughter?" Sarah finished. Her fingers worked at the fabric of her dress. "I have proof." Frank helped Mr. Waters to his feet. "Sir, should I escort her out?" "No," Mr. Waters said quickly. "Help me to the living room." And he looked at Sarah. "You come too, young lady." Sarah followed them through the massive foyer. Her wet shoes left small puddles on the marble floor. The living room was bigger than her entire apartment, with ceiling-high windows and leather furniture that gleamed in the lamplight. "Sit, Mr. Waters instructed, lowering himself into a high-backed chair. Frank stood by the door, arms crossed, watching Sarah carefully. Sarah perched on the edge of a leather sofa, her feet barely touching the plush carpet. Slowly, she reached under her dress and pulled out the photograph and letter. "That's why my dress looked funny," she explained, smoothing the slightly wrinkled items on her lap. "I didn't want them to get wet in the snow." Mr. Waters leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the photograph in her small hands. "May I?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah stood and approached him carefully, holding out the photograph. Her hand trembled slightly as he took it. The room fell silent except for the tick of a large grandfather clock. Mr. Waters stared at the photograph, his fingers tracing the faces in the image. The young woman's smile, so like Sarah's. His own younger face, before grief had etched deep lines around his eyes. "Where did you get this?" he asked finally, looking up at Sarah. "I found it in Grandma's jewelry box this morning. And this too." She held out the letter. Mr. Waters took the letter with unsteady hands. As he unfolded it, Sarah recited the parts she'd memorized. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, it means you're old enough to understand. Your grandfather doesn't know about you, but he's a good man. His name is James Waters." "Stop, Mr. Waters whispered. His face had gone pale again. "Frank, please leave us." "Sir, I don't think dash now, Frank." The security guard hesitated, then nodded curtly and left the room, closing the double doors behind him. Mr. Waters read the letter silently, his hands shaking more with each line. Sarah watched his face change. Surprise, pain, confusion, and something else she couldn't name. "Catherine," he whispered her mother's name. "My Catherine wrote this." "She was my mama?" Sarah asked quietly. Mr. Waters looked up sharply, really seeing Sarah for the first time. The same dark curls as Catherine, the same determined set to her chin. "How old are you, Sarah?" 5. Almost 6 in February. He did the math quickly in his head. Catherine had died 5 years ago, in a car accident with her mother, his wife. Or so he'd thought. The letter told a different story. The letter says she sent me to live with Mrs. Johnson, my grandmother, to keep me safe, Sarah explained. "From the reporters and people who might want to hurt me, because you're rich." Mr. Waters pressed his fingers to his temples. "Mrs. Johnson? Martha Johnson? My housekeeper." Sarah nodded. "But she's sick now. Really sick. And we don't have any heat. And I found the picture, and I thought—" She stopped, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought maybe you could help us, since you're my grandfather and all." Mr. Waters stood suddenly, walking to the window. Snow was falling harder now, coating the expansive grounds in white. Behind him, he heard Sarah's small sniffle. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I shouldn't have come. Grandma said some things should stay in the past, but I thought—" "No, Mr. Waters turned back to her. "No, don't apologize." He walked back to his chair, sitting down heavily. "This is overwhelming. I never knew Catherine that she had—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "She loved you," Sarah said simply. "The letter says so. She was going to tell you about me, but then the accident—" Mr. Waters closed his eyes, pain etching deeper lines in his face. "The accident." "Yes." He opened his eyes, looking at Sarah with new intensity. "Does Mrs. Johnson know you're here?" Sarah shook her head. "She was sleeping when I left. I left a note saying I went to a friend's house." She looked down at her wet shoes. "I didn't want her to worry. She'll be terrified when she wakes up," Mr. Waters said. He stood again, this time with purpose. "Frank," he called out. The security guard opened the door immediately. "Sir, get the car ready. We need to take Sarah home." "No." Sarah jumped up. "Please, you can't just take me home. What about Grandma's medicine? What about the heat? What about—" She gestured at the photograph still in his hand. "What about this?" Mr. Waters knelt in front of her, wincing slightly as his knees protested. "Sarah, listen to me. If what you've shown me is true, and I believe it is, then we have a lot to figure out. But right now, your grandmother needs to know you're safe. Can you understand that?" Sarah nodded reluctantly. "Are you mad at me for coming here?" "Mad?" Mr. Waters shook his head slowly. "No, Sarah, I'm not mad. I don't know what I am right now, but not mad. Will I see you again?" He looked at the photograph still in his hand, then back at Sarah's hopeful face. "Yes," he said firmly. "Yes, you will." Frank reappeared at the door. "Car's ready, sir." "Come on, Mr. Waters stood, offering his hand to Sarah. "Let's get you home before your grandmother wakes up." Sarah took his hand hesitantly. It was warm and rough, nothing like she'd imagined a millionaire's hand would feel like. As they walked toward the door, she looked up at him. "Mr. Waters?" "Yes." "Merry Christmas." He squeezed her small hand gently, his voice rough with emotion. "Merry Christmas, Sarah." The grandfather clock struck 8 as they left the living room, its chimes echoing through the massive house. Behind them, the photograph lay on the leather chair, a moment frozen in time that had just changed everything. The black luxury car glided through the snowy streets, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Sarah sat in the back seat, her face pressed against the window, watching Christmas lights blur past. Mr. Waters sat beside her, the photograph clutched in his hand, staring straight ahead. Turn left at the next light, Frank, Sarah directed. Our building's the red brick one, with the broken front step. The car slowed to a stop in front of a worn apartment building. Light spilled from a few windows, but most were dark. Sarah's apartment on the third floor was one of the dark ones. This is where you live? Mr. Waters asked quietly. Yes. Apartment 3B. Sarah pointed up. The one with the paper snowflakes in the window. I made those. Mr. Waters stepped out of the car, then helped Sarah out. Her shoes, now mostly dry, crunched in the fresh snow. They climbed the stairs together, Sarah leading the way. At the third floor, she stopped. Grandma might be awake now, she whispered. As if on cue, the apartment door flew open. Martha Johnson stood there, still in her nightgown, her face pale with worry. Sarah, she cried, then froze at the sight of Mr. Waters. James, she breathed. Hello, Martha. His voice was carefully neutral. Sarah rushed to her grandmother, hugging her around the waist. Don't be mad, Grandma. I had to show him. Martha's arms wrapped protectively around her granddaughter. Show him what? Then she saw the photograph in his hand. Her face went even paler. Oh no. May we come in? Mr. Waters asked. I think we have a lot to discuss. Martha hesitated, then stepped back. Of course. The apartment was cold enough to see their breath. Sarah's paper snowflakes fluttered on the windows, moved by drafts from the poorly sealed panes. A small artificial Christmas tree sat in the corner, a few wrapped presents beneath it. Sarah, baby, go put on your warm pajamas, Martha said, her eyes never leaving Mr. Waters. But dash now, please. Sarah looked between the adults, then trudged to her small bedroom. The door didn't quite close, and their voices carried through the gap. How long were you going to keep this from me? Mr. Waters asked. His voice wasn't angry, just tired. As long as necessary. Martha's voice was firm. She's all I have left of Catherine. She was my daughter, Martha. My daughter. And you let me believe. I let you believe what Catherine wanted you to believe. She made me promise. Sarah changed into her warmest pajamas, pressing her ear to the door crack. Why? Mr. Waters' voice cracked. Why would she keep her own child a secret from me? You remember what it was like, Martha said softly. The reporters, the threats, the kidnapping attempts. After your wife died, Catherine couldn't bear the thought of her baby being born into that circus. She wanted Sarah to have a normal life. So she hid her pregnancy, gave birth in secret, and a sharp intake of breath. The accident. Was she coming to tell me? Yes. Martha's voice was barely audible. She decided it was time. Sarah was almost one. She thought you'd had enough time to grieve for Eleanor. She was driving to your house that night. A heavy silence fell. Sarah could hear Mr. Waters pacing, his expensive shoes clicking on the worn linoleum. And you? He finally asked. You've been raising her alone all this time? I was already like a mother to Catherine after Eleanor died. Who better to raise her child? A pause. I've done my best, James. She's a good girl. Smart, kind. In a freezing apartment with no heat. Sick, with no medicine. His voice had an edge now. Why didn't you come to me when things got bad? Pride, maybe. Or fear. Would you have believed me? I believe Sarah, he said simply. One look at her. She's Catherine all over again. Sarah pushed the door open slightly, peering out. Mr. Waters stood by the window, staring at the paper snowflakes. Martha sat on their worn couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She has your eyes, though, Martha said softly. Catherine's face, but your eyes. Mr. Waters turned. Sarah, he called out. You can come out now. Sarah pushed the door open fully, now wearing fuzzy pink pajamas with cats on them. She padded into the living room, looking between the adults uncertainly. Come here, Mr. Waters said, kneeling down despite his creaking knees. When she reached him, he studied her face intently. Your grandmother's right. You look just like your mother. Do I? Sarah touched her own face. I don't remember her. You were too young, Martha said. Just a baby when... Tell me about her? Sarah asked Mr. Waters. Please? He glanced at Martha, who nodded slightly. Well, he began, leading Sarah to the couch. Your mother loved to dance. Even as a little girl, she was always dancing around the house. Hours passed as stories flowed. Mr. Waters told Sarah about Catherine's childhood, her favorite books, her pet goldfish named Sparkle, her dream of becoming a ballet dancer. Martha added details from the years she'd worked in their house, watching Catherine grow up. Sarah soaked it all in, finally hearing about the mother she'd never known. The cold apartment grew warmer with memories and shared laughter. Around midnight, Sarah's eyes began to droop. She fought to stay awake, not wanting to miss a single story, but eventually curled up against her grandmother's side. She's exhausted, Martha whispered, stroking Sarah's curls. It's been quite a day. Mr. Waters stood, straightening his jacket. Martha, about your situation. We'll manage, she said firmly. No. His voice was quiet but determined. No more managing. No more secrets. She's my granddaughter. And you. He paused. You were more of a mother to Catherine than Eleanor ever had the chance to be. Let me help. James, I'm not asking. Tomorrow morning, I'm sending my doctor to examine you. And I'm having the heat turned back on tonight. Martha opened her mouth to protest, then looked down at Sarah's sleeping face. She deserves better than this, she admitted. Yes, she does. And so do you. He moved toward the door, then stopped. I'd like to be part of her life, Martha. If you'll allow it. Martha was quiet for a long moment. She found that photograph for a reason, she finally said. Maybe it's time for the past to come into the present. Mr. Waters nodded, his hand on the doorknob. Merry Christmas, Martha. Merry Christmas, James. After he left, Martha sat in the dark apartment, holding her sleeping granddaughter. Sarah stirred slightly. Grandma, she mumbled. Yes, baby. Did I do the right thing? Martha kissed her forehead, remembering Catherine's words in the letter. Sometimes love requires courage. Yes, Sarah, she whispered. You did the right thing. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the city in a blank white canvas. In his car, Mr. Waters held the photograph under the dome light, tracing his daughter's smile with a trembling finger. And in apartment 3B, a little girl dreamed of ballet dancers and paper snowflakes, while the past and present slowly began to merge into something new. 3 days after Christmas, a sleek black car pulled up in front of Sarah's apartment building. 2 men in expensive suits stepped out, carrying leather briefcases. Mr. Waters emerged last, straightening his tie as he looked up at the third-floor window. Inside apartment 3B, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, coloring a picture while Martha prepared tea with shaking hands. The heat had been restored Christmas morning, and a new space heater hummed in the corner. Fresh groceries filled the refrigerator, and Martha's prescription sat in neat rows on the counter. A knock at the door made them both jump. Remember what we talked about, Sarah? Martha said quietly. These men are going to ask you questions. Just tell the truth. Sarah nodded, putting down her crayon. I know, Grandma. Martha opened the door. Mr. Waters entered first, followed by the 2 suited men. Martha, Sarah, he greeted them. These are Mr. Parker and Mr. Thompson from my legal team. The lawyers set their briefcases on the kitchen table, carefully moving Sarah's coloring books aside. Mr. Parker smiled at Sarah, but it didn't reach his eyes. Hello, young lady, he said. We'd like to ask you a few questions, if that's all right. Sarah looked at her grandmother, who nodded encouragingly. Okay, perhaps we should speak privately, Mr. Thompson suggested, glancing at Martha. No. Mr. Waters' voice was firm. Martha stays. She's raised Sarah since birth. She needs to be part of this. The lawyers exchanged looks, but didn't argue. Mr. Parker opened his briefcase and removed a recorder. This is just to make sure we get everything correct, he explained, placing it on the table. Now, Sarah, can you tell us how you found the photograph? Sarah sat up straighter. I was looking for change in Grandma's jewelry box to buy her medicine. The photograph was at the bottom, under her special necklace. And the letter? It was folded up behind the photograph. I didn't understand all the words, but I understood enough. Mr. Thompson leaned forward. What made you decide to go to Mr. Waters' house that night? The heat was off, Sarah said simply. Grandma was sick, and the letter said he was my grandfather and that he was a good man. She looked at Mr. Waters. It said my mom was going to tell him about me before the accident. The lawyers scribbled in their notepads. Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Parker turned to Martha. Do you have any documentation? Birth certificate? Medical records? Martha stood and went to her bedroom. She returned with a small lockbox. Everything's here. Catherine made sure of it. She unlocked the box and began removing documents. Birth certificate listing Catherine as the mother. Medical records from the private clinic where she gave birth. Photos of Catherine during her pregnancy. The original letter she wrote to Sarah. Mr. Parker examined each document carefully. And the father? Not listed, Martha said. Catherine never told anyone who he was. Mr. Waters, who had been standing by the window, turned sharply. She never? Martha shook her head. She said it didn't matter. That Sarah would have enough family with us. The lawyers continued their questions for another hour. Sarah answered truthfully about finding the photograph, making the journey to the mansion, everything. By the end, her throat was dry from talking. Well, Mr. Parker said finally, closing his notepad. The documentation appears to be in order, but we'll need to verify everything. And of course, there's the matter of a DNA test. DNA test? Sarah asked. Just to be completely sure, Mr. Thompson explained. It's a simple cheek swab, like in police shows. Sarah perked up. Mr. Waters laughed softly. Something like that. When can we do it? I've arranged for a lab technician to come tomorrow, Mr. Waters said. If that's all right, Martha? Martha nodded. The sooner we know for certain, the better. The lawyers packed up their materials. We'll begin the verification process immediately, Mr. Parker said. In the meantime, Mr. Waters, we advise against any public acknowledgement of the situation. Understood? Mr. Waters watched them leave, then turned to Martha and Sarah. I'm sorry about all this. The lawyers insist on being thorough. It's fine, Martha said. We have nothing to hide. Sarah stood up from the table. Want to see my room? I hung up the picture you brought yesterday. Mr. Waters smiled. The one of your mother at your age? I'd love to see it. Sarah led him to her small bedroom. The walls were covered in her drawings and the paper snowflakes she loved making. Above her bed hung the photograph Mr. Waters had brought Catherine at 5 years old, wearing a tutu and striking a ballet pose. She's so pretty, Sarah said, staring at the picture. Did she really dance on a big stage? She did. In the Nutcracker, when she was 12. Mr. Waters sat on the edge of Sarah's bed. She was a mouse. I take dance classes at the community center, Sarah said proudly. Miss Angela says I'm good. Does she? Mr. Waters' voice caught slightly. Maybe someday you let me watch you dance? Sarah beamed. I have a recital next month. We're doing Swan Lake. Well, a baby version. She demonstrated a wobbly twirl. I'm still learning. From the doorway, Martha watched them. Her heart ached seeing them together. Sarah's enthusiasm, James's wonder. So much time lost. Sarah, she called softly. Time for your reading practice. Can Mr. Waters listen? Sarah asked, already pulling a book from her shelf. I'm really good at the big words now. Mr. Waters looked at Martha questioningly. She nodded. 20 minutes, she said. Then homework. Sarah climbed onto her bed, positioning herself next to Mr. Waters. She opened her book, Charlotte's Web, and began to read carefully. When she struggled with a word, Mr. Waters helped her sound it out, just as Catherine had done with her own books so many years ago. Martha left them to it, returning to the kitchen to start dinner. She could hear Sarah's clear voice reading about Wilbur the pig, interrupted occasionally by Mr. Waters' gentle corrections or words of praise. A new routine was forming, tentative but real. The lawyers would verify, the DNA would confirm, but Martha already knew the truth. It was in the way Sarah's eyes crinkled when she smiled, just like Catherine's. It was in the way James watched her, seeing ghosts and miracles all at once. The truth had been hiding in a jewelry box for 5 years, waiting for a little girl brave enough to reveal it. Now it was out, and none of their lives would ever be the same. In Sarah's room, the story continued. A spider wrote words in her web, a pig learned about friendship, and a grandfather and granddaughter began writing their own story, one page at a time. 2 weeks after the lawyer's visit, Sarah skipped through the community center's double doors, her dance bag bouncing against her hip. Mr. Waters followed, ducking his head to enter the modest building. Miss Angela, Sarah called out, waving to her dance teacher. Look who came to watch. Angela Martinez looked up from adjusting a young student's leotard, her eyes widening at the sight of James Waters in her humble dance studio. She'd seen him in the newspaper plenty of times, but never expected him in her classroom. Mr. Waters, she said, straightening up, this is unexpected. Please call me James, he said, looking around the worn but clean studio. Sarah insisted I see where she practices. Sarah was already changing into her ballet shoes, chattering excitedly. Show him the music for our Swan Lake dance, Miss Angela. The one where I get to be a baby swan. Angela smiled, moving to the ancient CD player. Maybe after warm-ups, Sarah. Take your place at the bar, please. Mr. Waters sat on a folding chair against the wall, watching as Sarah joined the other young dancers. The kids whispered and pointed at him, but Sarah seemed oblivious to their attention, focused entirely on her plies. She has natural grace, Angela said quietly, sitting next to him. Just like her mother. Mr. Waters turned sharply. You knew Catherine? Angela nodded. She took classes here 2 years ago, before she moved to the fancy academy downtown. She paused. I was sorry to hear about the accident. Before he could respond, the studio door opened. Martha entered, still wearing her nurse's aide uniform from her new part-time job at the local clinic. Did I miss anything? She asked, settling into a chair on Mr. Waters' other side. Just warm-ups, he replied, his eyes never leaving Sarah. She's good. Catherine's blood, Martha murmured. They watched in silence as the class progressed. Sarah moved with determination, if not perfect technique. When she stumbled, she got right back up, her face set in concentration. Just like her mother there too, Mr. Waters said softly. Catherine never quit anything. The class ended too quickly. Sarah ran to them, her face flushed with effort. Did you see my turns? Miss Angela says, I'm getting better. You were wonderful, Mr. Waters assured her. How would you like to dash? His phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression tightening. The lawyers, he said to Martha. The DNA results are in. Sarah looked between them. Is that good? Yes, Martha said firmly. It means we'll know for sure. But we already know, Sarah protested. Don't we? Mr. Waters knelt down to her level, ignoring the strain on his knees. Yes, we do. But sometimes grown-ups need official papers to prove things. Why don't you go change? Then we can get ice cream before heading to my office. Sarah's face lit up. Even though it's cold outside? Best time for ice cream. He winked. Less competition. As Sarah ran to change, Martha touched his arm. James, what if? The results will confirm what we already know, he said firmly. Look at her, Martha. She's Catherine through and through. The drive to the Waters Corporation building was quiet. Sarah pressed her nose against the window, watching the city pass by, chocolate ice cream still smeared at the corners of her mouth. Martha kept smoothing her uniform, as if trying to make herself presentable for lawyers who'd judge her anyway. Mr. Parker and Mr. Thompson were waiting in the conference room, their faces professionally blank. Sarah climbed into a chair too big for her, feet dangling above the floor. The results, Mr. Parker said without preamble, sliding a document across the polished table. Mr. Waters picked it up, reading quickly. His shoulders relaxed. As we expected, Martha released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It's positive? 99.9% confirmation of familial relationship, Mr. Thompson confirmed. Sarah is, without doubt, Catherine Waters' daughter and James Waters' granddaughter. Sarah looked around at the adults. Does this mean I can call you Grandpa now? She asked Mr. Waters. The lawyers shifted uncomfortably, but Mr. Waters smiled. I'd like that very much. However, Mr. Parker cut in, there are still matters to discuss. Custody arrangements, financial considerations, public statements. Not now, Mr. Waters said firmly. Today we celebrate. The paperwork can wait. Sir, the press will eventually dash. I said not now. His tone left no room for argument. The lawyers gathered their documents and left, their disapproval evident in their stiff backs and tight smiles. What happens now? Sarah asked into the silence that followed. Mr. Waters looked at Martha. That depends on what we all want. But first, he reached into his briefcase. I have something for you. He pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver ballet slipper on a chain. It was your mother's, he explained, fastening it around Sarah's neck. She wore it for her first real performance. Sarah touched the pendant carefully. It's so pretty. There's more, Martha said suddenly. Everyone looked at her. More things of Catherine's. Photos, journals. I kept everything. You did? Mr. Waters' voice cracked slightly. Martha nodded. She made me promise to save it all for Sarah. For when the time was right. Can we see them? Sarah asked eagerly. Please? Mr. Waters checked his watch. It's getting late. Please? Sarah repeated. Just one thing. Martha and Mr. Waters exchanged looks. One thing, Martha agreed. Then dinner and homework. Back at the apartment, Martha brought out a cardboard box from her closet. She selected a leather-bound book, Catherine's high school diary. They sat on the couch, Sarah between them, as Martha opened to a random page. Catherine's flowing handwriting filled the pages, along with ticket stubs, dried flowers, and teenage dreams. Today Dad came to my rehearsal, Martha read. He fell asleep in the audience, but he came. Sometimes I think he works too hard, trying to give me everything. I wish he knew that just having him there means more than all the fancy tutus in the world. Mr. Waters cleared his throat roughly. Sarah leaned against him, the silver slipper gleaming at her throat. She loved you a lot, she said simply. Yes, he managed. And I loved her, just like I'm learning to love you. Martha closed the diary gently. Some bridges were built of DNA and legal documents, but others were built of shared memories and silver slippers, of ice cream on cold days and ballet classes in humble studios. The barriers remained. Lawyers with concerns, reporters who would eventually discover the truth, a society that would have questions. But in that moment, in a warm apartment with Catherine's diary open between them, none of that mattered. Sarah yawned, snuggling deeper into the couch between her grandmother and newly confirmed grandfather. The past and present merged in the quiet apartment, while outside, the city rushed by, unaware that a family was slowly, carefully becoming whole again. The coughing started at 3 in the morning. Sarah woke to the sound, now familiar, but somehow different, deeper, more painful. She slipped out of bed, her bare feet silent on the cold floor, and padded to her grandmother's room. Martha sat on the edge of her bed, doubled over, each cough shaking her thin frame. A glass of water trembled in her hand, spilling onto the worn carpet. Grandma? Sarah's voice quavered in the darkness. Martha tried to straighten up, to smile, but another coughing fit seized her. This time, Sarah saw the red spots on the tissue in her grandmother's hand. I'm calling Grandpa, Sarah said firmly, already running for the phone in the kitchen. Sarah, no. Martha's protest was cut off by more coughing. Sarah's fingers shook as she dialed the number Mr. Waters had programmed into their new phone. It rang 3 times before his sleep-rough voice answered. Martha. Grandpa. Something's wrong with Grandma, Sarah's words tumbled out. She's coughing really hard, and there's red on her tissue, and dash, I'm calling an ambulance. He cut in suddenly alert. Stay with her. I'm on my way. Sarah ran back to her grandmother's room. Martha had slumped against her pillows, her breathing labored and wheezing. The ambulance is coming, Sarah told her, climbing onto the bed. Grandpa, too. Martha tried to protest, but couldn't get enough breath. Instead, she squeezed Sarah's hand weakly. The next hour blurred into a sequence of sharp memories. Paramedics bursting through their door, their boots leaving wet tracks on the floor. Mr. Waters arriving still in his pajamas under his coat, taking charge with quiet authority. the cold night air as they followed the ambulance to the hospital. Now Sarah sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair in the emergency room, wearing her cat pajamas and Mr. Waters' suit jacket, which hung past her knees. Her grandfather paced the waiting room, making phone calls and demanding updates from every passing nurse. Mr. Waters, a doctor, finally emerged, his face serious. A word. They stepped aside, speaking in low voices, but Sarah could still hear snippets. Pneumonia, complicated by her existing condition. Need to admit her immediately. Insurance situation. Money is no object, Mr. Waters said firmly. Whatever she needs. The doctor nodded and hurried away. Mr. Waters returned to Sarah, sitting heavily beside her. Is Grandma going to die? Sarah asked quietly. No, he said firmly. No, she's very sick, but we're going to take care of her. The doctors here are the best in the city. Promise? He pulled her onto his lap, something he'd never done before. I promise. Sarah leaned against his chest, hearing his heartbeat through his thin pajama shirt. She didn't want to worry us, she whispered. She's been coughing for days, but said it was just a cold. That sounds like Martha, he sighed. Always putting others first. A nurse approached them. You can see her now. Room 412. They took the elevator up, Sarah's small hand clutched in her grandfather's larger one. Martha lay in a hospital bed, oxygen tubes in her nose, monitors beeping steadily beside her. She looked smaller somehow, lost in the white hospital sheets. James, she said weakly. You shouldn't have. Don't, he interrupted. Don't you dare say I shouldn't have come. Sarah climbed carefully onto the edge of the bed. Does it still hurt, Grandma? No, baby. The medicine is helping. Martha's voice was hoarse. I'm sorry I scared you. Why didn't you tell us you were getting worse? Mr. Waters demanded. Martha closed her eyes briefly. The new job at the clinic? I couldn't risk losing it. We needed the insurance. Damn the insurance. Mr. Waters rarely raised his voice, but now it shook with emotion. Your family, Martha. Family. When will you understand that means something? James? No, listen to me. He sat in the chair beside her bed, leaning forward intently. 5 years ago, you took in my granddaughter. You raised her, loved her, gave up everything to protect her. And now you're going to let me help you. No arguments. Martha's eyes filled with tears. I never wanted charity. It's not charity. It's family, Sarah said firmly, repeating her grandfather's words. A small smile touched Martha's pale lips. When did you get so wise? Must be those genes everyone keeps talking about. Sarah shrugged, making both adults laugh softly. The doctor returned with more test results. Martha had severe pneumonia, complicated by years of untreated health issues. She would need to stay in the hospital for at least a week, possibly longer. What about Sarah? Martha asked weakly. She has school, her dance classes. She'll stay with me, Mr. Waters said. It wasn't a question. Martha started to protest, but another coughing fit cut her off. The doctor quickly shooed Sarah and Mr. Waters out while nurses attended to Martha. In the hallway, Sarah looked up at her grandfather. Is this my fault? Because I told you about being your granddaughter? Mr. Waters knelt down, ignoring his protesting knees. Listen to me, Sarah. None of this is your fault. If anything, you probably saved your grandmother's life by being brave enough to come to me that night. Really? Really? He straightened up. Now, we need to get you home to pack some things. You'll stay in the guest room at my house until Martha's better. Sarah bit her lip. Can I bring Charlotte? Charlotte? My stuffed penguin. Mom got her for me when I was a baby. At least that's what Grandma says. Of course you can bring Charlotte. He checked his watch. It's almost dawn. Why don't you try to sleep for a few hours in the waiting room while I make some calls? Then we'll go get your things. Sarah curled up in one of the vinyl chairs, Mr. Waters' jacket still wrapped around her. Despite her worry, exhaustion pulled her under. She dreamed of her mother dancing, silver slippers flashing, while snow fell inside the hospital corridors. She woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of hot chocolate. Mr. Waters sat beside her, changed now into a fresh suit, holding 2 paper cups. The cafeteria's hot chocolate isn't great, he apologized, handing her one. But it's warm. Sarah sipped gratefully. Can we see Grandma before we go home? I mean, to your house? Of course. He helped her straighten her rumpled pajamas. And Sarah? It is your home, too, if you want it to be. Not just while Martha's sick, but after, too. We could turn the guest room into your room. Paint it any color you like. Sarah considered this. Could I put up my paper snowflakes? As many as you want. He smiled. And maybe we could put up some of your mother's old pictures, too. Martha said she kept everything. I'd like that. Sarah stood, still clutching her hot chocolate. Grandpa? Yes. I'm scared. He pulled her close with his free arm. Me too, sweetheart. But we'll get through this together. That's what families do. They walked to Martha's room, where she slept peacefully, her breathing easier now. Sarah pressed her small hand against the window, leaving a foggy print on the glass. We'll come back this afternoon, mister. Waters promised. After we get you settled and talk to your school about missing a few days. Sarah nodded, then squared her small shoulders. Just like Catherine used to do before a performance, mister. Waters thought with a pang. Okay, she said, but first we need to get Charlotte. She doesn't like being alone. Mister. Waters smiled, taking her hand. Together they walked toward the elevator, leaving Martha to heal under the watchful eyes of doctors and nurses who now had very specific instructions from one of the city's most powerful men. Spare no expense, take no chances. The price of love, he had learned, was not measured in hospital bills or legal fees. It was measured in coughs in the night, in brave phone calls from scared little girls, in hot chocolate at dawn, and in stuffed penguins named Charlotte who didn't like being alone. 2 weeks later, Martha sat in a wheelchair by the Waters mansion's grand fireplace, wrapped in a soft blanket mister. Waters had insisted on buying. Her breathing was stronger now, though not fully recovered. Sarah lay on the plush carpet at her feet, coloring in a new ballet-themed coloring book. More tea, Martha? Mister. Waters asked, already reaching for the delicate teapot. James Waters, if you try to feed me one more thing. Martha's mock threat dissolved into a gentle laugh. You done enough? Hardly. He poured the tea anyway. The doctor says you need to keep your strength up. Sarah looked up from her coloring. Grandma. Show Grandpa the thing you can do now. Martha took a deep breath, held it, and let it out slowly. No coughing followed. 3 days without a coughing fit, she announced proudly. That calls for celebration, mister. Waters declared. Sarah, why don't you get that surprise we talked about? Sarah jumped up and ran from the room, her sock-covered feet sliding on the polished floors. Martha watched her go, her expression softening. She seems happy here, she observed. But, mister. Waters caught the hesitation in her voice. But this isn't her home, James. Our apartment is too small, too cold, and 4 flights up with no elevator. He interrupted. The doctor said you need rest, proper care, and no stairs for at least a month. I can't impose Family doesn't impose, he said firmly, the words familiar now from repeated use. Besides, Sarah loves her new room. As if on cue, Sarah burst back in, carrying a large, flat package wrapped in silver paper. Can I give it to her now? Mister. Waters nodded, and Sarah carefully placed the package in Martha's lap. We made it together, she explained. Well, Grandpa paid for the fancy frame, but I helped pick the pictures. Martha unwrapped the gift slowly. Inside a beautifully crafted frame was a collection of photographs arranged in a heart shape. In the center was the photograph that had started everything. Young Martha, Catherine, and James. Around it were dozens of other photos. Catherine in her ballet costumes, Sarah as a baby, recent pictures of Sarah and Mr. Waters at the dance studio, Martha reading to Sarah, all 3 of them in the hospital room. Oh, Martha breathed, her fingers tracing the images. Oh, James. There's room for more, Sarah pointed out. See the empty spaces? That's for new pictures we'll take together. Martha's eyes filled with tears. Mister. Waters quickly handed her a handkerchief. Now look what you've done, she sniffled, smiling. Made an old woman cry. You're not old, Sarah declared. Miss Angela says you're as young as your heart feels. And your heart must be really young because it's strong enough to love both of us so much. Mister. Waters cleared his throat roughly. Sarah, why don't you show your grandmother what else we did today? Sarah brightened. Oh yeah, close your eyes, Grandma. Martha obliged. Sarah grabbed her wheelchair handles and, with Mr. Waters' help, carefully pushed her down the hallway to the mansion's east wing. Okay, open. Martha opened her eyes to find herself in front of a door decorated with paper snowflakes. Sarah pushed it open to reveal a beautiful bedroom, painted in soft blues and creams. It's your room, Sarah announced proudly, for when you're staying here, which is going to be always, right, Grandpa? Mr. Waters stepped forward. Martha, hear me out before you protest. The doctor says you need care for at least a month. The East Wing has an elevator, so no stairs. There's a nurse on call, and it's closer to Sarah's school than the apartment. And look, Sarah pointed to the walls where several familiar photographs hung. We brought some of Mom's pictures to put up, and there's a special chair for reading stories, and a desk for when you feel strong enough to write in your journal again. Martha wheeled herself into the room slowly, taking it all in. The furniture was elegant but comfortable. The bed looked cloud-soft, and large windows overlooked the garden. Most importantly, it was right next to Sarah's room. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, Sarah pleaded. Please? We could be together here. All of us. Martha looked at Mr. Waters. James, this is too much. No, he said quietly. This is exactly enough. This is what Catherine would have wanted. Her daughter, her mother, her father, all under one roof. All taking care of each other. We can still visit the apartment, Sarah added quickly, to water my plants and check the mail. But wouldn't it be nice to live somewhere with an elevator and a garden and a kitchen big enough for all of us to cook together? Martha touched one of the photographs on the wall. Catherine at her high school graduation, beaming between her father and her beloved nanny-turned-mother figure. She always wanted us to be a real family, Martha said softly. Even before Sarah, she used to say, Mom, why can't you and Dad just see that we're stronger together? She was right, Mr. Waters said. I was too blind to see it then, but I see it now. Let us be the family she wanted us to be. Sarah climbed onto the arm of Martha's wheelchair. Please say yes, Grandma. Charlotte likes it here too. Martha laughed wetly. Well, if Charlotte approves, is that a yes? Sarah bounced excitedly. Martha looked around the room again. At the paper snowflakes Sarah had insisted on hanging, at Catherine's photos watching over them, at Mr. Waters standing awkwardly hopeful by the door. Yes, she said finally. Yes, but on one condition. Anything, Mr. Waters promised. No more fancy teapots. I like my old ceramic one, just fine. Mr. Waters laughed, the tension leaving his shoulders. Deal. Though I make no promises about Sarah's ballet supplies. I saw a rhinestone-covered tutu in the dance shop window yesterday. Grandpa, Sarah gasped. Really? Only if you promise to practice extra hard, he teased. I will. I'll practice every day. Can I show Grandma my turns now? Miss Angela says I'm getting better at spotting. Martha settled back in her wheelchair, watching as Sarah demonstrated her improving pirouettes in the middle of the room. Mr. Waters stood behind the wheelchair, one hand resting lightly on Martha's shoulder. 3 hearts, beating in different rhythms, but somehow creating a perfect harmony. Catherine's dream of family, finally realized in ways none of them could have imagined on that snowy Christmas Eve. The paper snowflakes danced in the breeze from the heating vent, casting delicate shadows on the walls. Outside, real snow began to fall, but inside, warmth bloomed, not just from the efficient heating system, but from something deeper, something that had been waiting 5 years to flourish. Again, Grandma, watch me do it again, Sarah called out, spinning with determined grace. Martha and Mr. Waters watched, their hearts full, as Catherine's daughter danced in the fading afternoon light, her shadow mixing with the snowflake patterns on the wall, creating something new and beautiful and whole. The Waters mansion transformed as December returned. A massive Christmas tree dominated the main hall, its lights twinkling against the polished marble. Sarah had insisted on helping decorate, carefully hanging ornaments from a stepladder while Mr. Waters hovered nervously below. Higher, Sarah stretched, trying to place a crystal angel. I can almost reach Dash. Careful. Martha called from her comfortable chair nearby. Nearly recovered now, she still watched Sarah with protective eyes. I've got her, mister. Waters assured them, his hands ready to catch his granddaughter if needed. 1 year had passed since Sarah's brave journey through the snow. 1 year of building a new kind of family, of learning each other's rhythms and ways. Now, on Christmas Eve morning, the mansion buzzed with activity. Grandpa, is it time yet? Sarah bounced on her toes, still in her pajamas despite the late morning hour. Time for what? He teased, knowing exactly what she meant. The special dinner, and the presents, and Dash. First, Martha interrupted, breakfast. Then your dance practice. Then we can start preparing for tonight. Sarah sighed dramatically but obeyed, heading to the kitchen where Cook had prepared her favorite chocolate chip pancakes. Through the kitchen window, she could see the garden where paper snowflakes hung from tree branches, protected from the weather by careful lamination, her special project for the season. Don't forget your sweater for practice, Martha called after her. It's cold today. Mister. Waters watched the exchange with a soft smile. She's growing so fast. Children do that, Martha agreed. 1 minute they're hiding photographs under their dresses, the next they're performing solo pieces in dance recitals. Speaking of performances, Mr. Waters pulled an envelope from his pocket. The National Ballet is doing the Nutcracker next week. I got tickets for all of us. Martha took the envelope, her eyes widening. Front row. Catherine's old seats, he said quietly. I thought it was time to use them again. Before Martha could respond, Sarah raced back in, maple syrup sticky on her chin. Grandpa, Cook says there's a surprise coming for tonight's dinner. What is it? If I told you, it wouldn't be a surprise, he chuckled, tucking the envelope away. Now, shouldn't you be getting ready for dance class? An hour later, Sarah twirled in Miss Angela's studio, her movements more confident now after a year of dedicated practice. Mr. Waters watched from his usual chair, no longer an oddity in the humble community center. She's ready, Miss Angela said softly, sitting beside him. For the spring scholarship additions. She has her mother's talent, James. He nodded, watching Sarah execute a near-perfect pirouette. Catherine would be proud. Yes, Miss Angela agreed. Of all of you. Back at the mansion that afternoon, Sarah helped Cook prepare Christmas cookies, sneaking bites of dough when she thought no one was looking. Martha supervised from a kitchen stool, while Mr. Waters attempted to wrap presents in his study. No peeking, he called whenever footsteps approached his door. I'm not peeking, Sarah would reply. I'm just walking past. A lot. As evening approached, Sarah finally put on the new dress they'd bought for the occasion. Deep green velvet with a satin sash. Martha carefully braided her hair, weaving in a ribbon that matched the dress. Perfect, she declared, stepping back to admire her work. Almost perfect, Mr. Waters corrected, entering with a small box. This was your mother's. She wore it for her first Christmas performance. Inside the box lay a delicate gold bracelet with tiny ballet slippers dangling from it. Sarah gasped as Mr. Waters fastened it around her wrist. It's so pretty, she whispered, making the charms dance. Catherine would want you to have it, Martha said, adjusting the ribbon one last time. The doorbell rang, its deep chimes echoing through the mansion. Sarah looked up in surprise. Who's that? Mr. Waters smiled mysteriously. Part of the surprise. Shall we go see? They made their way to the main hall, Sarah practically bouncing with excitement. Frank, the security guard who'd witnessed that fateful night a year ago, opened the door to reveal. Miss Angela, Sarah squealed. Her dance teacher stood there in a beautiful blue dress, holding a wrapped package. Behind her, other familiar faces appeared. Sarah's favorite librarian, her school teacher, even some of her dance classmates and their parents. Surprise, Mr. Waters said softly. I thought we could share our Christmas with the people who've helped make this year so special. Sarah threw her arms around his waist. Thank you, Grandpa. The mansion filled with voices and laughter. In the dining room, Cook had outdone herself, preparing a feast that earned appreciative gasps from the guests. Sarah proudly showed her friends the Christmas tree she'd helped decorate, while their parents admired the crystal ornaments and twinkling lights. After dinner, everyone gathered in the main hall. Mr. Waters cleared his throat, drawing their attention. A year ago, he began, a very brave little girl walked through the snow to change all our lives. He smiled at Sarah. Today, we're not just celebrating Christmas. We're celebrating family. The one we were born with, and the one we choose. Miss Angela stepped forward, which is why we all work together to prepare something special. She nodded to Sarah's dance classmates, who quickly moved to clear a space in the center of the hall. What's happening? Sarah whispered to Martha. Watch, her grandmother replied with a knowing smile. Music filled the air, the familiar strains of the Nutcracker. Sarah's friends, who'd been secretly practicing for weeks, began a simple but beautiful dance routine. At a gesture from Miss Angela, Sarah joined them, falling naturally into the steps they'd rehearsed in secret during lunch breaks. Mr. Waters watched, tears in his eyes, as his granddaughter danced in the same hall where Catherine had once practiced her own routines. Martha squeezed his hand silently. When the dance ended, applause filled the mansion. Sarah curtsied, beaming with joy, her mother's bracelet catching the light. Time for presents, someone called out, and the children rushed to the tree. Sarah opened each gift carefully, delighting in books, new dance shoes, and art supplies. But her favorite gift was the one Martha and Mr. Waters gave her together, a handmade scrapbook filled with photos and stories about Catherine. So you'll always know where you came from, Martha explained, and how much you were loved, even before you were born. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, snow started falling outside. Sarah stood at the window, watching the flakes drift past the paper snowflakes she'd hung in the garden. Penny for your thoughts? Mr. Waters asked, joining her. I was just thinking about last Christmas, she said, when I was scared to ring your doorbell. Are you still scared sometimes? Sarah considered this. Not scared, but sometimes I miss the old apartment. Is that okay? Of course it is. He knelt beside her, ignoring his protesting knees. That was your first home with Martha. It's okay to miss it. But this is home now, too, she said decisively. With you and Grandma and Cook and Frank and everyone. Yes, he agreed. This is home. Martha joined them at the window, wrapping a shawl around Sarah's shoulders. Look, she pointed. The paper snowflakes are dancing in the wind. They stood together, watching real and paper snowflakes swirl in the garden lights. The crystal angel on top of the Christmas tree caught the light, sending rainbow patterns across the marble floor. Merry Christmas, Sarah said softly. Merry Christmas, her grandparents replied in unison, their hearts full of the kind of joy that only comes from finding what you never knew you were missing. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight sparkling off fresh snow. Sarah woke early, but instead of rushing downstairs to her presents, she sat on her window seat, watching the garden sparkle. Her mother's bracelet jingled softly as she hugged Charlotte the penguin. A gentle knock on her door preceded Martha's entrance. You're up early. I was thinking, Sarah said, making room on the window seat. About what? Martha settled beside her, wrapping them both in a warm blanket. About how different everything is from last Christmas. Sarah touched one of her paper snowflakes, taped to the window. Remember how cold our apartment was? And now look at us, Martha smiled. In this big, warm house, with a wonderful grandfather who loves you very much. And you too, Sarah added firmly. He loves you too, Grandma. A deeper voice joined them from the doorway. She's right, you know. Mr. Waters stood there in his robe and slippers, holding 3 steaming mugs. Hot chocolate for breakfast? Don't tell Cook. Sarah made room for him on the window seat, creating a cozy crowd. They sat quietly, sipping their hot chocolate and watching the birds visit the winter feeders Mr. Waters had installed at Sarah's request. I have something to tell you both, Mr. Waters said finally. I've been working on a project. Is it about the foundation? Sarah asked. She'd learned that her grandfather's charitable foundation helped lots of people in the city. Yes, actually, we're creating something new. The Catherine Waters Memorial Scholarship. Martha's hand trembled slightly on her mug. James, It will cover dance lessons, equipment, and competition fees for talented young dancers who can't afford them, he continued. And Sarah, if you'd like, you can help choose the recipients each year. Sarah's eyes widened. Really? Really? Your mother always wanted to help other dancers. Now we can do it in her name. Can we tell them about her? Sarah asked. About how she danced and loved ballet, and she hesitated. And about me? Mr. Waters exchanged looks with Martha. They kept Sarah's identity private this past year, protecting her from media attention. But now, I think, Martha said slowly, it's time for the world to know about Catherine's daughter. If you're ready, Sarah thought about this. Will people ask lots of questions? Probably, Mr. Waters admitted. But we'll face them together. As a family. Okay then, Sarah decided. But first, presents. They laughed and followed her downstairs, where the Christmas tree sparkled with morning light. Presents spilled out from under it, though not as many as last year. They'd all learned that love couldn't be measured in packages. Sarah opened her gifts slowly, savoring each one. New dance gear, books, art supplies, and a special leather-bound journal with her name embossed in gold. For your own stories, Martha explained, like your mother's diaries. But the biggest surprise waited in the garden. Mr. Waters led them outside, where a path had been cleared through the snow to a small building near the rose garden. Your own dance studio, he announced, opening the door. Sarah gasped. Mirrors lined one wall, a professional bar ran along another, and the floor was sprung wood perfect for practice. A small sound system sat ready in one corner. Miss Angela helped design it, Mr. Waters explained. She'll come here for private lessons when you're ready. And look, Martha pointed to the walls. Photos of Catherine dancing hung there. Inspiration for her daughter's own journey. Sarah ran to the bar, naturally assuming first position. In the mirrors, she could see her grandparents watching her with love, and above them, her mother's photos seemed to smile down. Later, as they sat in the living room enjoying Cook's Christmas breakfast, Mr. Waters cleared his throat. There's one more thing, he said. Martha, this is for you. He handed her an envelope. Inside were legal papers, property deeds. The apartment building, he explained. I bought it. It's being renovated as we speak. Better heating, a new elevator, updated everything. And the top floor will be converted into a community center, with room for dance classes for neighborhood kids who can't make it to Miss Angela's studio. Martha's hands shook. James, I don't know what to say. Say you'll help run it. The foundation will handle funding, but we need someone who understands what these families need. Someone with a big heart and practical mind. Can I help too? Sarah asked eagerly. Of course, Martha smiled through tears. It could be our special project. All three of us. 4, Sarah corrected, pointing to Catherine's photo on the wall. Mom's helping too from heaven. Mr. Waters wrapped an arm around each of them. Yes, she is. The day passed peacefully. They video called Miss Angela to thank her for her part in the studio surprise. Sarah practiced in her new space while Mr. Waters and Martha watched. Cook outdid herself with Christmas dinner. As evening fell, they gathered in the living room. Sarah played on the carpet with Charlotte, showing the penguin her new journal. Martha knitted in her favorite chair, a hobby she'd taken up during her recovery. Mr. Waters sat at his desk, working on scholarship papers. Grandpa? Sarah called suddenly. Yes? Thank you for not calling the police when I showed up last Christmas. He laughed softly. Thank you for being brave enough to come. And Grandma. Sarah turned to Martha. Thank you for keeping me safe all those years. Martha set down her knitting. Oh, my darling girl. You kept me safe too. Sarah stood and walked to the photograph that had started everything. The one of young Martha, Catherine, and Mr. Waters. Now it hung alongside newer photos. Sarah's first dance recital in the mansion. Martha's welcome home party after her hospital stay, Mr. Waters teaching Sarah to tend the rose garden. We're kind of like a paper snowflake, Sarah said thoughtfully. How so? Mr. Waters asked. Well, you start with something plain like paper. Then you fold it and cut it in different ways. And when you open it up, it's beautiful and special, even though it's not perfect. Like us, we're not a regular family, but we're special anyway. Martha and Mr. Waters exchanged glances, their eyes shining. "When did you get so wise?" Martha asked. Sarah shrugged. "Mom's jeans, remember?" "Mister." Waters laughed and pulled her into a hug. "Catherine would be so proud of you. Of all of us." Outside, snow began to fall again. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, and 3 hearts beat in perfect harmony. On the wall, Catherine's smile watched over them all. Her dream of family finally realized in ways she could never have imagined. A little girl's courage, a grandmother's love, a grandfather's open heart. 3 separate stories that had folded together like one of Sarah's beloved paper snowflakes, creating something uniquely beautiful. And in the garden, protected from the weather, paper snowflakes danced among real ones. A reminder that sometimes the most precious gifts come wrapped not in silver paper and bows, but in the simple, honest love of a child who dared to ring a doorbell on a cold Christmas Eve.